Hello, all you photographers out there in Zoom land. It's the first time here, so we'll see how it goes. I'm going to talk about the adjustment brush, which is a tool that's available in both Photoshop and Lightroom. It is not available in Photoshop Elements. I don't know if you've tried it or not, but it's very much worthwhile for adjusting smaller portions of your photo. Let's see if I can get it on my screen here. I've got Photoshop here. This is Photoshop Classic. Essentially, it's the same tool, the same technique in Lightroom. I'm going to open up a photo. Okay, so this image happens to be a raw image. And so when it's opened in Photoshop, it opens up in the raw converter. If we were in Lightroom, it opens up automatically in the develop module. You don't have to have a raw image to get into the raw converter. You can also process JPEG images. And I believe what you do is go to the image and right-click on it. And I think one choice is open and another one is open in RAW. So this will handle both the raw images and the JPEGs. So when you get your image into your editor, as you may have heard me talk about before, one of the first things you want to do is evaluate it. And so I look at the picture and I look at the histogram. And my conclusion is it's a good exposure. I look at the histogram and I don't see anything on the left side that indicate blacks, completely blacked out. And there's nothing on the right of the histogram that indicate there's any whites that have been burned out. So the exposure is good. So what I'd like to do here is maybe just sort of see if I can't enhance this a little bit or improve it or make it just a little bit better. But one of the things that bothers me in this photo is this black tree or this black bush at the right center. It's just too dark. And because it's so dark, it sort of gets your attention, which I don't want to draw attention away from the church. The church is the subject. And also, just a little nitpick is there's a little building on the right-hand side. It looks like a barn or a shed, and it's also dark. So I'd like to lighten those two things up. And then I look at the sky, and I was appreciative the day I took this that I had a nice sky, blue sky with some white clouds. But I'm thinking I can improve it a little bit, make it a little bluer. And I'm thinking what I would do there would be maybe darken that a little bit and maybe increase the saturation somewhat. And then the other thing that catches my eye is the front of the church, which looks very white. Now, of course, that's where the sun's hitting it. And it's a white building. So to the eye, it looks almost like it's burned out. But according to the histogram, it's not, which tells me there's probably detail there that can be made visible. So these things I want to do to improve this photo are localized. They're also called targeted adjustments. We don't want to affect the whole image. We just want to affect those specific areas. So this is where the adjustment brush comes in. Over on the right-hand side of the screen are all the adjustment settings, all the sliders. And these are all what we use to make global adjustments. They will make adjustments to the entire photo. So what we want to do is get the adjustment brush. If I move my cursor over to the right, up here on this tool, at the upper right here, it tells you it's the adjustment brush. So I click on it, and when I click on it, the right-hand side of the screen changes. They sort of look like those same adjustments that we saw earlier, but now it's different. These are now the adjustments available to the adjustment brush. They're very similar to what they were before, but not exactly. And they only come into play, they only become visible when we select the adjustment brush. So now in my cursor, you now see the symbol for the adjustment brush. What we want to do before we use it, it has some settings. We want to review those settings. And so they're over here on the right. Here's one called size. And it's pretty straightforward. This changes the size of the adjustment brush. You know, I can slide this over, make the brush larger. But like other tools in Photoshop, if you use the slider to change the size, you really don't know how big you're going to get until you let go of the slider and go back to the picture. A better way to adjust the size of the brush is on the keyboard to use the square bracket keys. They look like parentheses, but they're square. And if you tap one of them, the brush gets smaller. And if you tap the other one, the brush gets larger. And the neat thing about that is you can see the size of the brush as you're doing that. So I prefer to use the bracket keys when I change the size of the brush. The other setting for the brush over here is feather. And this has to do with how the adjustment will blend into the surrounding part of the picture. So let's look at the cursor symbol again. Let me make it a little bit smaller here. Notice that the symbol for this brush shows us a center point, which is like a crosshair, and then you see a black circle, and then outside of that you see a dashed line circle. So what that's all about is the center point is, of course, the middle of the brush. And then the area inside the black circle is where the adjustment is made completely. And then the distance from the black circle to the dashed circle is where the feathering comes in. So if I make an adjustment with this, it all takes place inside that black circle, and then it gradually fades away as it moves out towards the dotted circle. And you can change the amount of the feathering. Now you have to do that over on the slider. So here's feathering, and here's the this adjustment that was set at 78. I can move it up to the maximum of 100. Come back and look at the brush. Doesn't look a whole lot different, but it almost looks like you have equal amounts inside the black circle and another equal amount out towards the dotted line circle. So that's called 100% feathering. And you want to use that where you need this to blend in a lot to the surrounding area. Now, if we change the feathering to the minimum, I can turn it down to 0. Now you see a big difference in the brush. You still see the black circle and the dotted line circle, but there's almost no distance between them. So the feathering is at a minimum here. So you have to decide before you use the brush how much feathering you want. There's some occasions where you're going to go into a very specific, maybe a well-defined area where you don't need any feathering, so you can set it down at 0. Or for instance, if I was going to work on the sky, I need it to feather into the horizon. I need it to blend in there. So if I were working on the sky, I would want to have a lot of feathering. And so you have to make this decision, of course, before you start doing your adjustment. So I'm going to start with the sky. So I'm going to change the feathering. I'm going to make it a maximum. So I've moved the feather slider over to 100. All right, so now I'm back in looking at my brush, and I see I've got the maximum amount of feathering here. There's 2 other adjustments for the brush. One of them is called flow, and one is called density. And they're similar. And what they have to do with is how much of the adjustment gets laid down when you paint over an area with the brush. If you have a small amount of flow, it only makes a small amount of adjustment, and you can keep painting over it and keep adding to it. I find out that I don't need that. I don't use that. I leave these two settings at 100, because after I've made my adjustment with the brush, I can then go to the slider for the adjustment and adjust it more or less until I get it where I want it. I don't need to have had a variable flow or density in the brush. So those are the settings where I'm going to leave them here for the sky. I might make I think the size is pretty good here. Now the other thing is I want to be able to see when we talk about painting with the brush. I want to see where I've painted, and so they provide an overlay. And the overlay is checked over here in the settings. And here's the mask options. And I want to turn this on. I want to be able to see this. All right, so now I'm back onto the picture. I haven't changed any of the settings, but what I want to do is select the area that I'm going to work on. So what I'm going to do essentially here is paint the sky. So I'm just going to start up in the corner here. I'm going to put the black circle on the sky and hold the button and just drag it across. And you see it puts the overlay down. All right, now I'm going to come down towards the horizon, and I just want the dotted circle to touch the horizon, because that's where I'm getting the feathering. All right, so I let go of the mouse, and it puts a pin in the upper left-hand corner to designate that as one of my adjustments with the brush. And it's pretty neat to have that overlay, so you can see that did you get all the area you wanted, and maybe did you get too much? I don't know if you can see this, but I can see some of that pink on the church steeple where I don't want it. And then down here at this barn in the center of the picture on the horizon, I think there's some pink on there. So I don't want to adjust those areas. So what I want to do is remove the pink so there's no adjustment in those areas. So in order to see what I'm doing, I'm going to zoom in by going down here to the lower left. It says 15.4%. I click this little arrow, and I've got different settings for zooming in. I'm gonna zoom in at 33% here. I click on it, and now you see I've zoomed in. And when I've zoomed in on the picture, I can move around by holding the space bar. I hold the space bar with my finger, and it makes a hand. And now I can with the mouse, I can grab the picture and move it around. So now I can see the pink on that church steeple, which I don't want. And I want to get rid of that. And the way to do that is sort of negate the brush by holding the Alt key. So when I push the Alt key down, you see the brush looks different. And what I'm going to do is move it over onto the steeple, and I'm going to paint on the steeple with this while I hold the Alt key. And you see it's going to take the pink away. And it does a really nice job of this. And this reminds me of, in Photoshop, there's a quick selection tool. It sort of guesses where you want to go. And if I work on an area repeatedly, it sort of figures out what I'm trying to do. So it becomes very helpful. Now I want to look at that barn that was in the center horizon. Let me get my space bar, move up here. I might need to zoom in on that a little bit more so I can come down to the lower left again. And maybe zoom in 66%. And so there's some buildings right there on the horizon. And I see the pink overlay on them and I want to get rid of it. So again, I hold the Alt key, sort of changes my cursor a little bit, and I just paint on that building. I don't have to be real accurate because it sort of figures it out. And I pretty much take that away. Okay, so now I'm gonna go back to seeing the whole picture. Go back to that lower left corner, and I choose the setting called Fit in View, so I can see the entire photo. All right, so now here's where I want to make my settings on the sky. So when I'm ready to do that, I don't need to see the mask anymore. So I'm going to come over here where it says Mask Options and turn that off. So now I can see what I'm doing with my settings, but nonetheless, it's the sky that's selected. So what I want to do is, I think two things here. I want to reduce the exposure a little bit and give it some saturation. So I'm going to come right over here to the exposure adjustment and just start to move that to the negative side a little bit. And at that point, it says -50. That means you've reduced the exposure about a half a stop. And so I think the blue looks better. And maybe that's all I'm going to do. And then I'm going to move down on my adjustments by grabbing this scroll bar and pulling it down till I can see the saturation. So here's the saturation adjustment. And so I'm going to move it to the right to get more saturation. I don't need a lot here. It's 20. Maybe I get around something around 25. And it seems like the sky looks better. Now I'd like to see a preview of this. And I can do it here at the bottom right of the picture. There's a little box that says cycles between before and after. So if I click on that, it puts the two pictures side by side, which is really helpful because you can see how much the adjustment you've made. And it's here when I can decide if I have too much adjustment or I need a little bit more. I can go back and make further adjustment to it if I want. But I think that looks pretty good. Excuse me. All right, so that was one adjustment with the brush. Now I'd like to get to this bush right here. So in order to adjust this, I need a new brush. So I go over here to the brush settings, and right here's a plus sign. And so when I click on it, it gives me a new brush. Notice that the pin in the upper left-hand corner of the picture is a white circle. So it's not selected. When it's selected, it has a black dot in the middle of that white circle. So I'm now about to make a new adjustment. And so what I want to do is go down to the adjustment area. And when I get to the top of it, when I move the scroll bars to see the top, there's a little arrow right here. And it says reset the correction channels, reset the adjustments, it means. So I'm going to click that, and it puts all the adjustments back to 0. Otherwise, it retains the adjustments you used on the previous brush. All right, so now I'm going to do this bush. And the question is, how big should my brush be and how much feathering do I need? Feathering isn't a big issue here, so I'm going to put it in the middle somewhere. So I go to my feather bar and just click it in the middle. I happen to get lucky and hit 50. And my brush is pretty big here, so I'm going to hit my left bracket key and bring this down. And I'm gonna paint on that brush, but I want to be able to see how I'm doing. I want to see that very clearly, so I'm going to zoom in on this. And I think some people are hesitate to zoom in on things. But the point is, why not zoom in to see this as big as you can get it, so you can see exactly what you're doing. So I'm going to go back down to the lower left of the screen. I'm going to go to 66%. I'm really zoomed in. To move around, I press the space bar and hold it. And now I can move around, and here's the bush. So maybe I'm in too much. Go back down to the lower left where it says 66. And drop it out to 33, all right? So I'm zoomed in on the brush, on the bush. And here's the size of my brush. When it's on the, I can't see the feathering when it's down here, but I can see up here, that's about a 50% feathering. So I'm gonna turn my mask back on again, down here with the mask options, and I'm now gonna paint the bush. And I'm gonna try to keep the whole brush on the inside of the bush as I paint and go around it. And so there it is. And I don't think it's a real big deal here. I could zoom in. I don't want to get these tombstones here. I could zoom in down in the lower right again, get that 66%, and move this up. I think there's a little bit on these tombstones, which we don't need. I don't know how important this is, but I may as well clean it up. So I hit the Alt key. I'm now in the minus mode, and I paint on the tombstones. And if there's any pink on them, it's erased. I also notice when I look at the bush, it looks like there's little spots or little holes in it. So I'm just going to brush over it some more. You see right here, there looks like there's some little dots. Over here, there's some little green spots. So maybe the original brush didn't take when I brushed it. So I'm going to do it again. See how I brushed those spots away? It just shows that I really have gotten all of it. Now there's a little bit up here. This is a little bit of funny business here. You don't quite have the whole bush. And there's a little spill over there with some of the feathering. I think it's a little bit weak right down through here as well. I'm going to paint that over again. All right, so I'm pretty satisfied with the area that I have painted. So I'm going to turn the mask options off. There's the bush. What I want to do with this, I'm thinking, is to increase the exposure and maybe add some texture to this. So how much do you add? You just have to do this, eyeball this. So you see it getting brighter? And I see I'm up about one stop. I've increased the exposure 1. So that's 1 stop. I'm going to go a little bit more in that, maybe 1.5, something like that. And then I'm going to go down in my adjustments with this scroll bar to where I get the texture. And this is a great adjustment, and you can really max this out. It doesn't hurt things too much, but it does put texture in the bush. So let's see how it looks in the whole picture. I'm gonna zoom out again, go down to the lower left, go to fit in view, and there we can see it. And I can use my preview again right here. See the difference that makes with that bush. And we can do the same thing to that little building. It's not a big deal, and I'm not going to zoom in on it, but I'm going to get a new brush. So I come up here to the plus sign, get a new brush. I don't hardly need any feathering on that building because I'm going to just paint in that rectangle. So I'm going to put my feathering down very low. And I'm going to zoom in on this to the 66%. I get to press the space bar. I have to find the building. There it is. All right, so I get the size, no feathering, very little feathering. Turn on my mask again and paint the building. And you see, I go over the line a little bit. It does a pretty decent job with that. I see somehow it went out the bottom. So I see a little bit right here that went out and just a bit on the roof. So I'm just going to subtract those away, hit the Alt key, paint right over this, and go up and I put the center of my circle right on that and paint that right off of the roof. And there it is. So I'm going to turn off the mask. I'll stay zoomed in on it. Again, what I want to do here is increase the exposure a little bit. Well, you know what I did? I didn't reset the settings from the bush. So it's already turned this up to 1.5, which I think is too much. I might put this down to 1. And it's also maintained that texture that I put into the bush too. I'll leave that there. So just as a reminder, it's a good habit to reset your brush every time you go to a new one. Let's take a look at the whole picture. Go back to the zoom in the lower left. Put the whole picture in view. So now we can see, to me, the building looks a little more natural. It looks like a little red barn. So now we've adjusted the bush, the little barn, and the sky. Let's just check our preview again. If I want to turn those pins off, I have to pick a different tool. See, when I pick a different tool, those pins sort of disappear. Now they're still there. All right, so the other thing I want to do with this church is see if I can knock down the brightness on the front of it. All right, so I go back to the normal view here. And I'm going to zoom in on that front of that church. Over in the lower left, about 33%. Hold the space bar and I can pull that in. And I'm concerned with these white areas in the front surfaces of the church. All right, so now I have to go back and get my adjustment brush right here. And I'm going to tell it now that I want a new brush. I want to turn the mask on. And to reset it, I have to scroll up to the top of the settings. And it looks like it's already reset. If this doesn't work, the settings are reset. And I think they reset because we moved to a different tool and then came back to the adjustment brush. All right, so let's see. My size is here. Might make this a little smaller. You see, when I get so small, I can't hardly see anything. If I increase it, that's about the smallest I can get it. And I don't need any feathering here at all, because I'm going to be in the surfaces of this church. All right, so here I go. I'm going to try to paint right on these white surfaces. That's one. We come down to this one. We get this surface. You see, and it sort of follows the line for you. And then I want to get this area over here. And even up this little bit right there. You know, at first you might think, oh, that's just too much work. Well, we're gonna go back and forth on a little bit. So there's a couple, I think I got most of it. There's some overspray a little bit in the windows. I'm gonna hit the Alt key on this. So now I'm in my subtract mode, and I'm gonna put the center of the tool right on that window because I don't want that there. Paint that out, and I'm gonna paint it out of this window. And then I'm going to paint it off these edges here. You see, I moved the center of the brush right along the, so it didn't get that one quite right. I have to go back and paint that in again. And then I'm going to subtract it out again. And it seems a little tedious, but what happens is, as you do this, the tool sort of catches on to what you want. Could be helping me a little bit more, I think. Try one more time here. Doesn't look too bad. Here's a little spot that I don't want right there. Try that again. And I don't want it on the window. And it might not be perfect, but I think it's looking pretty good here. Well, I lost it here. Works a lot better when I'm at home. I'm going to say that looks pretty good. All right, so now what I want to do is make my adjustments. So I'm going to turn the pink off. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to see if I can't reduce this by, take the brightness away by knocking down the whites a little bit right here. And the highlights. Maybe a little bit more. I could see that gray up a little bit. Let me zoom in a little bit more on that so I can see what's going on. It's a little blotchy, I think, from not doing a good job with the brush there, but you can see the detail in this white surface now. I might even try to take that white down a little bit more, and the highlights. It's hard to know which one's controlling the problem there, but I think we can see detail there that we weren't able to see before. And if I try the preview, you see it puts the two side by side. Let me try that again. See if I can move this over. Hit the space bar and put this in the middle here. Hit the preview. And it wasn't the best paint job, but you can see it does reduce the brightness there. I'm going to go back to where I can see the whole photo. Say fit into view. There it is. The pins are there. So at any time, you could go back to any one of these pins just by selecting it, and you could readjust it. You see the masks are still there. And if you don't want them, again, you go to another tool. The pins go away. And here's our final preview of this. Are there any questions out there?
I have one, Ron. This is Laura.
Okay.
The feathering, can you explain when you use that feathering and when you don't? Because you were saying in the sky you didn't need to do it. In the barn, I think you feathered it a little bit. So I get confused on when to use feathering and when not to.
And what I meant to say, and I don't know exactly what I said here, was I wanted the feather when I selected the sky, because I know it's going to blend into these trees. You know, so there's a lot of funny things going on the horizon. So I wanted to blend into that, even over on the left. It needs to blend in. So when I selected that sky, I wanted a lot of feathering, so I maxed it out.
Okay.
Now, when I did the little red barn, I don't need any feathering because it's going to stay right in that rectangle.
Okay.
And when I did the white surfaces of the church, you know, they're defined. They're linearly defined there. So again, I don't need any feathering. And on the bush, it was sort of halfway in between. I want some feathering and don't need a lot, so I put the feathering in the middle. I think I had said about 50. Does that help?
It does. And I think I just need to do some practicing too, because I don't want to, sometimes I have lines and you can see the where it stops, and I just have to play around with it, I guess.
Okay, and again, don't be afraid to zoom in on it. It seems like extra work, but that's the best way to see exactly what you're doing and how the effect is working, and whether you're getting it where you want it and keeping it away from where you don't want it.
Okay. It looks good though. I like it. Great job.
Thanks. I'm going to do another photo. So I'm going to cancel this one out, unless there was any other questions on this one. All right, let me cancel this out. Let me open another photo. Okay, so here it is. Again, this is a raw image. Automatically opens up in the raw converter. As you can see, it's got some problems right off the bat here. It's too bright, and something on the left needs to go. So I'm going to make some global adjustments to this before I start doing the targeted adjustment brush. So I'm going to crop the left off with the crop tool. Just pull this in and see somewhere here. That might just get rid of, there was a trellis there. All right, so that's okay for the crop, so I hit the enter button. And then I'm looking at the histogram, and it tells me that nothing's blown out here, but it looks awfully bright here. I'm just going to knock that exposure down on the whole photo. And keep my eye on that squirrel, because that's the guy I want to take care of there. So, all right, so I'm down about -1 stop here. And so that's for the whole photo. So I think that makes a big improvement. So now what would I like to do to this? Those leaves in the top center, they were really bad looking because they had mildew on them. So there's white on them and there's yellow on them and they're awful bright. So I'm going to try to, what I want to do with those is tone those down and see if I can green them up a little bit. And then the board that the squirrel's sitting on, I'm going to see if I can't darken that and maybe put some texture into that. And then I'm going to take a look at the squirrel, and I think his exposure is pretty good there. I'm thinking if I could just add a little contrast or texture to him, he might look better. All right, so let me get the adjustment brush up here, and I'm going to do those leaves in the middle. So I'm going to say, give me a medium feathering on that, and I'm going to need a bigger size. Again, the flow and density are at 100%. And I'm going to turn my mask back on here. And I'm going to paint these leaves. And I don't want to get the squirrel. You see, I go over it a couple times. It's like it doesn't get it all, everything the first try, but that's a pretty good grab on these leaves. So now that I've got them, I want to see what I can do to adjust them. So I'll turn the mask off. And I'll come down here, and I think what I'm going to do here is reduce the exposure, and then there's a tint adjustment between green and magenta. I think if I push that towards green, it might help the color. So I'm going to start knocking this exposure down to where I think it looks better. You know, and there's no right answer to this. You make these adjustments to where it looks better to you. I think that sort of helps a lot with those leaves. So then I'm going to grab this scroll bar and go down here. Excuse me. What happened to my? Oh, I'm up here. I'm up here in temperature. You see where it says tint? And so the tint goes from green to magenta, and this is more for color correction. You know, if you had too much green, you can dial it out if you have too much magenta. But I'm going to use it to try to add some green in. So I'm going to move this to the left. And I think it's making that a little greener. So I'm going to do my preview.
Oh, wow.
Now, this is the preview of everything. You know, we cropped it, we reduced the overall exposure, and we did this targeted adjustment on those leaves in the top center. But I think we're making the picture, we're salvaging this picture. So take the preview away. Now let me see what I can do with that board at the bottom. So I'm going to get a new brush. So I go up here to tell it, give me a plus, give me a new brush. I want to go down to the, so where it says selective edits, and this is where the adjustment is to reset. I reset, that puts all the settings back to 0 again. I'm going to turn on the mask, and I want to work on this wood. So I'm going to paint the wood. By the way, I see that I was about 50 on the feathering, which I'm just going to leave it at that. Really don't want to get the squirrel, but I want to get the wood. So that's sort of a rough shot at it. And I see I've got overspray there, so I'm going to zoom in on this. Try the 33%. I hit the space bar, and I'm going to look right here. I see I've got pink paint on the tail. We got to get rid of that. So I'm going to make this brush small, and I'm going to hold my Alt key, and I'm going to paint the tail. And you see I get that pink right out of it. And I don't know if I needed it up here on this backboard here. I guess I don't care about those other ones. Now I'm gonna hold the space bar and move this over. And I see some of the pink went into the garden here. I'm just gonna take that away. Am I all the way over? I'm at the corner there. So I think I've got it where I want it. So I'm gonna go back to zoom out, fit in view. So I've selected the wood of concern here. Now I'm gonna turn off the mask. And what I'm gonna do here with this to fix it, I'm gonna turn down the exposure and kick up the texture. So here's my exposure. Just gonna turn it down a little bit.
Wow.
That's a half a stop down. I don't know if you want to do any, let's see what it looks like more than that. There's 3/4 of a stop down. How about one? Let's just look at it. All right, there's -1 stop of light. All right, so I'll leave it at that. And then I'm going to move my scroll bar down to get to my texture, to kick that texture way up. You see how the grain is enhanced in the wood. So I like that better when it doesn't look as flat. It's not showing you a whole lot of shape and grain, you know, three-dimensional grain here, but you can see the lines in it. So that looks pretty good. Now I want to see what I can do with that squirrel. I'm getting a new brush. So I'm gonna select the squirrel. So I don't need much feathering. I'm gonna turn the feathering off here. I'm gonna move my scroll wheel back to the top and reset it, and turn my mask back on. And I've got my size way down, so I'm just gonna paint on the squirrel. I'm thinking maybe I should have had a little bit of feathering there. So I'm going to go back up here. I can add some. Come back here. And carefully try to get all of that squirrel here. Well, I guess I should be zoomed in on this. So I'm going to get on here and say, give me the 33%. It looks pretty good. Maybe I should get that ear back there. A little bit of, so you just fuss with it. And I don't know that you need every little item here, but you want to get the gist of it. I like to get the edge of this tail here. Yeah, it's going a little too far. All right, so I'm gonna subtract by holding the Alt key. No, it doesn't look too bad. I see a little piece of his knee there. I don't know about this foot. You see, I hit the Alt key again, just so where you get the little bit of overage, you can erase it away. It's pretty amazing how accurate you can be with that. So while I'm here, let me move this with the, hold the space bar and move this down. I'm looking at his back and his fur. I'm going to go right to texture and kick that way up. Let me turn the mask off. So here's where that was. And when I turn that texture up, you see how it just brings that fur to life. So I'm up about 90% on that. So I'm liking the look of that. I'm going to zoom out. Fit in view. And I want to see my preview here. And I'll get rid of those pins by choosing another tool. And there we are. And it's looking pretty good to me. How about you? Are there any questions about this one?
Looks great.
Thanks. Well, I hope you can see the advantage of using this adjustment brush. You know, we all adjust our pictures with the global adjustments, you know, to give them, change the brightness and give them more contrast and change the colors. But to really fine tune the picture, you got to get in there and take little areas at a time and improve each one little area, and it makes a world of difference to the photo.
Now, that is not in Elements.
The adjustment brush is not in Elements. They have a brush, I think it's called a magic brush, and I think it works primarily from presets. You might want to check into that, though. That might help you if that's what you're using all the time.
Amazing difference between before and after.
Okay, well, if there's any more questions, that's about the end of the presentation. Anybody else, any comments or questions?
Great program.
Thank you.
Well done, Ron. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.